Hi guys, I'm Adrian, and today I will be talking about the importance of a person's voice and the physiology of speech. So, take a moment and picture this scenario. You're in class and you're trying as hard as possible to listen to what the teacher has to say about a certain topic. However, the teacher seems very monotonous, and the way they speak gives you the impression that you're just listening to someone who's reading off a PowerPoint or a book. It's usually hard to stay focused in that kind of situation, right? Now, imagine you're in that same class again, but this time the teacher is very enthusiastic. You can tell by the sound of their voice that they know exactly what they're talking about, and they have your attention all throughout. Now, while both teachers are teaching you the exact same thing, one person gives off a much stronger impression. That's the reason why voice is very important. The things we say can have a very strong impact on the people who listen to us. Of course, you cannot deliver your ideas if you do not have something to say in the first place. However, it is not just the content of what you are trying to say that matters. Even the way that you say something affects how people will receive your message in the end. With that in mind, I will discuss the physiology of speech with you guys. There are two mechanisms involved in producing speech. The first one is the voice-producing mechanism, and the second one is the mechanism of articulation.
For the purposes of our explanation, please refer to the diagrams you see on screen. The first mechanism is the voice-producing mechanism, and under it, you have respiration and phonation. Respiration is relatively simple to understand. You need a supply of air to make a sound in the first place. Voice production requires air to pass upward from your lungs to your trachea and then your larynx, also known as the vocal folds, which is a spot somewhere in front of your trachea. A sound is made when you exhale. Normally, air just passes by the vocal folds, but when you speak, your vocal folds come together. As air passes through them, they vibrate and produce a weak sound. The process in which air passes through the larynx and vibrates is called phonation. Do note, however, that the sounds made by phonation are not the same as the sounds that people hear when you speak. Phonation also does not finish until the sound made in your larynx is produced through the nose, mouth, and throat. It is worth mentioning that the pitch of the sound made is affected by the shape of a person's vocal folds. Long, thin vocal folds will produce higher pitches, while short and bulky vocal folds produce lower pitches. Lastly, to produce a louder sound, the vocal cords need to be closed tightly together, which in turn requires more air pressure from the lungs. The next mechanism that takes place is the mechanism of articulation, where you have resonation and articulation to add different qualities to the sound made. In resonation, qualities are added to the sound made through phonation as it passes through the throat and the head. The principal resonators are the upper part of the larynx, the throat, the nasal cavities, and the mouth. Notice how the mouth moves when it makes vowel sounds like A, E, I, O, and U. As the mouth moves, it opens and closes, and the vowel sound made changes as well. Lastly, there is articulation. Aside from the nose, throat, and oral cavities, other parts of the mouth, namely the teeth, lips, tongue, jaw, gum ridge, and hard and soft palates, modify the resonated sound, enabling a person to articulate it into distinct speech. Through the movement of these parts of the mouth and throat, the size and shape of the oral cavity changes, which in turn will make different vowel and consonant sounds. These, in turn, add many varieties to speech. Now that you guys understand the physiology of voice, we can now move to aspects of voice that you can work on, namely volume, pitch, rate, quality, pauses, emphasis, and variety. When it comes to speaking, whether it be publicly or in conversations, we should try to improve on these aspects to keep the flow of ideas interesting without becoming dull.
Volume is the intensity or loudness of a voice, and volume can actually differ from person to person depending on their range. that is ranging from a scream to a whisper. Volume is very crucial when it comes to public speaking. That was back then. It is until now, but because of new electronic amplifications that we use, volume can be manipulated. And depending on how we speak and depending on where we speak, we have to coordinate our volume, especially when we use microphones or other amplifying devices that makes us speak louder as well. While the most important thing in volume is to be heard, you can also use your volume to vary your presentation and to make it more dynamic. For example, you can use volume to emphasize or give meaning to a certain concept or to something that you want to convey to make your speech more effective and exceptional.
Pitch. Pitch is basically the highness or lowness of your voice. Guys normally have it lower. Girls have it higher normally. And that's just because of biology. Pitch is important because it makes your speech less boring and less monotonous. It can help you put your message across more clearly. Utilizing the pitch of your voice during a speech or during just normal speaking can give a lot of flavor to the message to your listeners, basically. It gives a lot more meaning to some of the words you say. It gives a lot more emotion to the things you say. Like, if you say yes in a normal tone, it just means you're affirming it. Like, yes, it's an affirming tone. If you say it in a high tone, like, yes, it means you're excited, you just got good news. Or if you say it in a low tone, like, yes, may mean that you're guilty of something or you're not sure of what you're saying. Intonation or pitch can really change the message you're putting across and give flavor to whatever you're saying.
Rate is the speed at which someone speaks. It's another aspect that helps your listeners and will affect how they understand what you were trying to say. Speak too fast, your audience will get lost. Speak too slow, on the other hand, and they'll get bored. When it comes to public speaking, there is no normal rate, which means that there is no constant speed you need to stay at for a whole speech. It very much helps to be flexible. Maybe you'd want to slow down to stress certain points, or you'd want to speak faster to gloss over some points you've already discussed. It's completely up to the speaker to vary how fast or slow they speak.
Vocal quality is considered to be one of the most difficult aspects of using our voice. It is the timbre of our voice. Just like how music of each band can be differentiated from one another by the timbre of their music, voice distinguishes a person from one another. A resonant voice leaves a desirable impact on the audience. A voice that's too thin, too preachy, or too nasal are undesirable qualities. These qualities come from poor phonation.
To be or not to be, that is the question whether 'tis noble in the mind to suffer the stings and hours of outrageous fortune to consequence to see of troubles and by posing in them to die to sleep pretends to dream other. You get the idea.
There are times when we have no choice but to speak fast without pausing. But that is only when the bell is about to ring and we haven't delivered the final punch yet. However, taking pauses is essential. It enables the speaker to breathe, and the audience too. That small silence gives depth to the performance and adds to the overall feeling of the talk. When you are just a beginner in public speaking, it is quite hard to find the right timing to pause because you'll feel like you have to say everything. But eventually, you'll figure out which part of the speech you have to pause to give the most effective suspense, or pause to let the audience ponder about the mind-blowing idea you just said. It is but a small silence, but its power is limitless. Even Beethoven and Chopin used rests in their masterpieces.
Hello, welcome to my makeup channel, Charot. The meanings of the things we say can be affected by the way we say them. It is often hard to notice, but every day, when we speak, we shift from aspect to aspect of our sentences to indicate what we want people to focus on. There exist changes in volume, stress, not that kind of stress, and other factors that change how people interpret the message. The shift in focus is what we call emphasis. Now, why is it important? Well, first thing is that sentences are ambiguous. For a spoken sentence to establish a concrete idea, the speaker must emphasize an area of focus. Various situations require different focal points. Next is that emphasis gives a sentence its direction. It allows the receiver to determine which parts are essential and which are not. And this dynamic keeps the audiences at the edge of their seats the same way riding in a crowded SM North Jeep does. And it establishes the flow of spoken paragraphs the way actors effectively manifest the script into a scene. It is achieved by applying variations in volume throughout the speech to build contrast and changing the rate at which we speak and apply pauses. But the most effective way emphasis is applied through speaking is with emotions. You speak differently when you're excited, when you're sad, or when you're on the streets fighting for national democracy. Emotions affect our messages, and therefore you don't just deliver a speech confidently. You must be confidently beautiful with a heart.
Which speaker is more engaging? O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Change your pitch, vary your tone, make it so that it matches the emotions you want to convey to your audience. In order to be persuasive, you have to sound convinced yourself. Other people may laugh if you sound very enthusiastic and sometimes too extra, but the feelings you want to express should be a natural part of the way of your delivering.
Most topics covered in this video can fall under factors that influence the voice, but dwelling less on the technical aspects, we'll find that there are inherent factors of voice production. We are all blessed with varying structures that affect how we speak. That's why we all don't sound like Batman. We hate how our voices sound when we hear them in recordings. That's because we hear our voices a lot differently. When you speak, you hear your voice resonating through other cavities within your skull. That's why it sounds deeper than when other people hear it. The same way my voice is affected by this bathroom because this is all I can afford in this economy. Voices sound differently and confined in open spaces, and therefore the environment is a factor that affects our voice. Culture also influences how we use our voice. We speak with people from other regions and we don't know if they're mad or not because that's how they speak. And the environment that they grew up in affects how they use their voice. Apart from these, there are countless other factors that affect how we use our voice that can be observed on a daily basis. And these are factors that we can use to our advantage as we practice speaking.
Hello everyone, my name is Lycasel and I am here to talk about the characteristics of having an effective voice. So what is an effective voice? What does it comprise of? What does it entail? And how do you actually know how to effectively use your voice? And how do you improve it? Well, first off, you have to know what are the characteristics of having an effective voice. Which is, first and foremost, we want to be heard and we want to be clear in what we are trying to convey. But how are we able to do that if people can't even hear us? And this is where audibility is important. To achieve audibility in speaking, we have to know what vocal projection is. For those who don't know what vocal projection is using the strength of your voice to speak loudly and clearly without hurting your voice. That is, regardless of how big an audience is or how small an audience is. But first off, before we are able to project our voice, we have to learn how to breathe properly through our diaphragm, just like in singing, which is the #1 tip. But the common mistake with people trying to breathe through their diaphragm is that they use their chest in breathing instead of their diaphragm instead. You can actually see this when you see people breathing like this. which is wrong. That's not how you breathe through a diaphragm. You're breathing through your chest. Your shoulders are not supposed to go up. What happens in breathing through a diaphragm is that your stomach expands and contracts as you inhale and exhale. Imagine when you lay in your back. You can see that when you breathe normally, you can see your stomach going up and down. That's when you breathe through your diaphragm. But the thing is, when you breathe through your diaphragm, when you use it in public speaking, you have to breathe in deeply and exhale deeply without forcing or pushing the air into your stomach. And that's the thing, that's also wrong, because you have to take away tension that restricts your airflow, so you are able to breathe properly and effectively to be able to speak. Story time. Back when I was in high school, I used to be in a theater club, and in our theater club, every practices, we are required to do vocal exercises so that we are able to say our lines and do our scenes properly before that. So what happens is, what I notice in myself is that I tend to breathe through my chest every time. And when that happens, I actually notice that I tend to run out of breath easily. And I can't do my lines properly or act out my lines properly because of that. And it sacrifices my vocal projection. So what happens is that you have to repeat your scene again, or you have to repeat your line again because you can't hear you. So one thing that can practice your vocal projections, that can practice you into breathing normally, is through vocal exercises, which is, there are actually a lot of them that you can find, especially in YouTube, that can help you in your public speaking. And the thing with vocal exercises is that it can help you breathe normally and as well as project your voice at the same time. The second characteristic of having an effective voice is having a pleasant voice. You see, having a pleasant voice is the backbone or the blueprint of your personality. It's something that makes people think that you're likable, respectable, charismatic, and makes them want to listen to you. But the thing is, not everyone has a pleasant sounding voice. So what do we do about it? The key factor here is pitch. As we notice, most of us or all of us actually have a distinct pitch that we use when we talk. Sometimes it's high, like, "Hi there guys, hello," or low, like, "Hey there guys, hello." And it's very distinct to every person. But when it comes to doing speeches, doing just one kind of pitch can be monotonous, can make your speech boring, and it's just one factor to make people not listen to you and turn a deaf ear. So what you do is that you mix varieties of pitches and incorporate it in how you talk. Find that optimum pitch that you know can make you best speak effectively and convey your message effectively as well. But don't just settle for one pitch. Settle for many of them. Do any kinds of pitches. Of course, having a pleasant voice doesn't come overnight as well. So what you can do to practice is that you can just use a simple sentence, for example, and then incorporate different kinds of pitches on it and see what works best for you. The third characteristic of having an effective voice is fluency. Fluency is a smooth, ready utterances or words that we speak. And there are many times that we tend to hesitate or make mistakes or perhaps make inappropriate pauses like yeah, that can somehow ruin or sacrifice the quality of our speech. And it is completely normal at first, since we are all still learning how to hone our skills, how to speak effectively. But an effective speaker is able to break through that nervousness and anxiety and convert it into a well-spoken and understanding speech. Of course, just like any other characteristics, learning how to speak fluently doesn't just come overnight, especially when it comes to impromptu speeches. It takes practice as well, training, and being confident in oneself and thoughts to be able to speak effectively. Lastly, the fourth characteristic of having an effective voice is flexibility. I'm sure that throughout your lifetime you will be able to do many kinds of speeches like declamations, informative speeches, persuasive speeches, or even eulogies, etc. and etc. But regardless of what kind or how varied those speeches are, these characteristics that I've just mentioned are also crucial. And that's where flexibility comes in. You have to be flexible enough to adjust to a situation. You can't just do a same style of speech to a different type of speech. It just doesn't work that way. You have to be able to manipulate your voice, your tone, your articulation, or even your gestures, depending on what kind of speech you're giving, depending on what you want to convey, depending on what you want to convey, or perhaps depending on what kind of mood you're trying to settle, and depending on how you're able to convey that message, and depending on how effective you are as a speaker, will determine whether the people will be listening to you or turn a deaf ear.
Pronunciation. Pronunciation is the way you utilize vowels, consonants, and an accent to say the words you're speaking in your language to. Put it simpler, it's basically just how you say things, how you say the words you speak or the sentences you say. That's it. The way you pronounce things can come from a lot of varying factors. One factor being your accent comes from where you're from, where you're born in, or where you grew up in. Meaning, an American person can have an American accent, an Australian person can have an Australian accent, and British people can have British accents. It dictates how different people can say the same word but in a different way. Like how people say tomatoes and some people say tomatoes. Some people say zebra, some people say zebra. Some people say potatoes, some people say potatoes, some people say pajamas, some people say pajamas. Your pronunciation of words can also come from your education on your language. Some people, if you study more of a language or you're more exposed to it, you're more likely to pronounce the words more correctly, or more often than not. A person who reads a lot of English or listens to a lot of English, or just in general is more exposed to the English language, is most likely going to be better at pronouncing words. Proper pronunciation is important because it creates a good impression, especially in formal occasions. Sample on an interview, or in an interview, proper pronunciation is probably best to impress your interviewer. Improper pronunciation can normally make a bad impression. Like sample, when you're giving a speech, your audience might be thrown off by your wrong pronunciations. It's just like when even simply pronouncing a name wrong, it can throw off a lot of people. If you pronounce the name Janine and say Janine or something, it can leave a bad impression. So it's important to have proper pronunciation, and if you're having trouble on having proper pronunciation or knowing how to pronounce a certain word right or correctly, you can always check the dictionary or the thesaurus, or you Google it, because they give you the proper pronunciation there. So if you need any help on pronouncing words, always check those databases. So that's it for pronunciation. On to the next thing.
Articulation is the process of forming meaningful oral symbols through the manipulation of our articulators. Tongue, soft and hard palates, teeth, gums, lips, and jaw. Now, you may be thinking, what's the difference between articulation and pronunciation? Well, to put it simply, pronunciation refers to the manner of how we speak language, while articulation refers to the way we use our speech organs to make sounds. You can articulate the word perfectly, but mispronounce it. For example, sounding the word bee and the word bomb, like I just did. Good articulation results in crisp and distinct sounds that are easier to understand. Filipinos have a particular notoriety for certain incorrect articulations. For example, power overwhelming, or think tough, divine judgment, are common errors in articulation that Filipinos are often making. My mother works at a call center, and she often talks about how these things are connected thoroughly through training and constant reminders. Now certain call center agents retain some of these problems even after years on the job. Here are a few examples. Large tongue, braces, or other physical problems can result in articulation problems. It can also come about from daily social interactions without even us realizing about it. It could even be a result of simply being nervous. If you think you have sloppy articulation, work on identifying and fixing those problems through practice, those common errors, and the results will be definitely really worth it because your speeches will be more intelligible.
Kada adlaw, kada oras, minuto, segundo, inani na lang juday ka perfect. Uya pud sa uban,
The Philippines is such a diverse community. Every dialect has its own grammar, pronunciation, and accent. There is no superior dialect out of around 185 that we have. It is just that having an accent, so to speak, when speaking in English or Filipino, says a lot about the speaker's regional background, just like the late Senator Miriam Santiago.
Kaya nag-aga pa ako naglumpat sa country ko, kaya makadto ako diri. Pero may masakit ako, sana ako patuig na ginabulong dito sa Metro Manila. Galing nga siguro makadto ako sa abroad para lang magpabulong. Ako man gihapon, aga pa alas 5, nagbiyahe na ako. And you know that in Metro Manila, to travel in traffic is to risk your life. You never know whether you will reach your destination dead or alive. Plus, makasagupa mo kung ikaw nagmamaneho, maasahan mo makasagupa mo mga driver na may road rage, mga drug addict, mga sex addict. Kapinpan, bisa nga halit sa Senado.
And it is very much obvious when she speaks in Filipino. Using a dialect in a speech can be both useful and not, depending on how you use it. Example, multiple speeches of President Duterte speaking in Bisaya while addressing various audience.
Sila pula-po. Even killed Bajina. Anong ginawa ng itong komisyon ito ng... anong ginawa nila kay Lapu-Lapu? Ginawang isda ang puta.
For Bisayan, or someone who understands Bisaya, it may sound funny and very entertaining, while for others, it could be very offending.
Is that fair? Tama equality among the Filipinos. Is that fair? Ang national hero mo is Capiche, Benedito, Paksiw. Kinakain mo sila Lapu-Lapu. And he did the greatest thing for all of us. He killed the first imperial inutil.
Each dialect has its different characteristic in deliverance, and its usage can help in adding a personal or emotional punch to the speech. But it could also build a wall, the most famous language barrier.